now related to creating deeper networks. There's a very important concept called batch normalization. Okay, so let me give you the intuitive idea, then we'll develop the equations, and as part of this homework, you'll implement batch normalization. So it is a little bit complex, okay, to show you how complex it is. Let me give you a reference, but in my opinion, if you read the reference, you'll be intimidated, so you'll be better off not to read it. So anyway, if you Google, for example, let's see, this is the one. This one. Stop. That's it. Which one do I think there should be like something there? Okay, so anyway, if you Google like deriving the gradient for backward pass of batch normalization, okay, so let me make this bigger. Okay, so anyway, whoever wrote this article said, I recently sat down to work on assignment 2 of Stanford. It is lengthy and definitely a step up from, but the insight you gain is tremendous, right? So that's why I think it's important for us to understand this. Okay, so anyway, let me just briefly show you the math over here. So if you go through, okay, so you'll see, and the final result is not too bad, but there's significant amount of steps involved over here, right? So anyway, so I looked at quite a few other articles as well. In my opinion, it could be done a lot simpler. Okay, so let me give you my perspective on it. And then, like I said, you'll program it and verify that that indeed is correct. Okay, so the idea of the batch normalization is like this. Okay, as we go through our network, so suppose there's a layer, it feeds to the next layer, right? Okay, so as you saw through regularization and so on, the weights start to become smaller and smaller, right? As a result, the gradient update becomes less and less as we keep going. Okay, so basically it can run into a situation where the network is not learning anymore. So batch normalization is a way so that the outputs start to not become close to zero. A solution to the problem of gradients becoming too small. So one of the benefits of the batch normalization is, okay, we can use higher learning rate if we implement it properly, of course. Okay, prevents overfitting to some extent. Okay, and allows us to create deeper networks without worrying about gradients vanishing or becoming too large. Okay, the idea is intuitively is pretty simple. Intuitively, the idea is, let's say we produce the output of a layer, right? Okay, over a period of time, this output, if we take a look at, on a sequence, on many different inputs that are being fed, the output may be, let's take a look at on a batch of data. Because if we're using mini batch, right, we'll accumulate the gradients on the mini batch and then update the weights and so on. Okay, so anyway, if you take a look at, we feed in a mini batch of data, we get some outputs over here. If we take a look at these outputs, maybe they vary from -0.9 to, okay, this is before applying the sigmoid. So let's say they vary from -0.01 to, I don't know, 2.7 or 2.9, whatever, right? Okay. Or in some cases, it will be -0.01 to 0.005. It's so small, okay? So the idea is to basically scale these. So make them, so center them around, so center the outputs. Okay, around the mean. Okay, so if we have a batch size of 10, right? For every neuron, there will be, as you can see, 10 outputs. Okay, if we took the mean of it and we started subtracting each output from this mean from each output, you'll see. So if this is the center, if rather than all those 10 outputs being over here, now as we subtract from the mean, they will become centered around the 0, right? Or whatever the mean is. Okay. Anyway, so that's one thing we do. Then second thing we do is scale each output. By the variance of data. Okay, so basically, if we have some data, okay, so essentially this is what we are doing. This is produce sum of I, right? Okay, so then once we pass it through this batch normalization layer, okay, let me just call it. Now I don't have to worry about lowercase, so I'll just put, okay, so suppose I call this SI hat. Okay, so SI hat will be SI minus the batch mu over sigma squared B plus epsilon squared root. Okay, so just take a look at how this will, so whatever weights are being produced over here, So this output, as you can see, we are subtracting from, so this is the mean of the batch. Okay, and this is the variance of the batch. So we subtract the mean. So essentially, even if the values were too small, as we divide by this, you will see they will become a little bit larger, right? Because if this was, let's say, 0.01, and this was whatever, so as we divide by the square root, if it's 0.01, you can see we'll make these values bigger. So So the benefit is, as we go through the batch normalization, the outputs are scaled and they are shifted towards the mean. Okay. So this intuitively does make sense, right? It will make the outputs bigger in size and center them around the mean. Okay. However, what if we were trying to approximate, let's take a very simple example, something like equation of a line like ax plus b. So as you can see, if we centered it around the zero, around the mean, we'll miss this. So we still need a capability to be able to shift this output if we wanted to. So then what we do is we pass it through one more layer. So we pass it through batch layer, batch normalization layer, where we scale this output and shift it. So there's further scaling and shifting going on. So think of this easily as scale and shift. So we define two parameters, gamma and beta. And suppose I call this SB, the output of the batch norm. Okay. So let me now okay, so this SB is this over here. Now we'll go through a regular activation function, which could be sigmoid or softmax, doesn't matter. And then if I flip this, all of this now. So this is one neuron. So we have modified the architecture of the neuron to look like this now. Okay. So what is this doing? Basically, this is centering and scaling by sigma square b, or sigma b, because we take the square root of it. Take out the square. Okay, so now let me go over the equations of it. So let's pretend this is the last layer to make it easy, right? Then here will be the loss function. Here will be the L, so here will be the y of I as an example. So what do we call this output? Actual output, right?
Yeah.
In our terminology, A of I. Okay. So now that we have defined each one of these, we can create a chain of derivatives to solve the delta problem. So as we introduce, so anyway, before I go into the equations, okay, once again, let's put the equation over here. Si hat equal to Si minus mu b over sigma square p plus some epsilon. And the reason we put some small, so this could be 1 into 10 to the negative 6, in case this is 0, it will not make it infinity. So as you can see, whatever sum we produced, okay, now this is the batch mean, the batch variance, right? It's adjusting each one of these by making it centered around the mean of the data and divided by the variance of the data, so that if it is too small, this value will become a little bit higher, right? Okay, then let's go to the SB. SB is defined as Si hat gamma plus beta. Okay. So think of this gamma like a scaling factor. So as you can see, whatever, after we went through this, if we further wanted to enhance it or reduce it, it will scale it. And what is B going to do? Just like a bias, make it go positive or negative direction. Okay, so the parameters from a back propagation point of view. So from back prop point of view, that we need to compute are, so this gamma, beta are learned parameters. Okay, so we need to, so they're not constants. Through the data, I will learn what should be the proper value of gamma, what should be the proper value of beta, right? So we need to do partial L over partial gamma, partial L over partial beta. Okay. Then we also need to know delta and delta batch normalization. Okay, what exactly is delta? If you follow my terminology, delta we always define as the gradient before the activation function, right? Okay, delta Bn we will define over here to be right here. Because if we know the delta over here, right? Because remember, if there is any kind of layer involved over here, we can do, how do we compute the deltas over here?
This delta into the weight matrix into the activation function of that layer.
Right, so that if we have this, it will make our life easy. Everybody agrees?
Yeah.
Okay, so now if we can solve for 4 equations, delta L over delta gamma, delta L over delta beta, delta and delta Bn, our life is easy. Okay, so let's start with the easy one. Okay, delta L over delta gamma. Tell me from this picture. See, one of the, I think in my opinion, if somebody drew this picture, it will make it so easy to follow. A lot of the articles, they just start writing the equations. Now in your head, you're confused what's what. You know, very similar to I got confused with the, what was that, softmax. If you have a picture, really it's extremely easy, okay? So take a look over here, partial L over gamma. What will it be? Create the chain, partial A. Partial A over
partial SB.
Partial SB, perfect. And then partial SB over partial
SI.
No, because we want this, right? Gradient with respect to, sorry, to the gamma.
Okay.
So it will be gamma, because then these will cancel out and you'll get the, right? Give me where, let's assume mean squared loss.
Mean squared, okay.
Minus
So
minus
yi
AI.
minus ai
Minus AI minus YI.
into a with respect to s.
Partial A over partial SB. Okay, pretend sigmoid.
So ai into 1 minus ai.
Okay, what do we call this thing?
Delta.
Delta.
Okay, so this actually, we already know how to do this, so this is trivial. The hard part is really delta Bn, and these are easy too, but this is the hard part. So I'll come to that in a second. Anyway, what's the last derivative over here? Partial SB over partial gamma. Okay, if you take a look at this equation, what will this be?
Simple as that.
Okay, and if we give it a batch, right? If we know the mean of the batch, we know the variance of the batch, do we know what SI hat is?
We can calculate.
We can calculate, it's easy. Okay, so do we know partial L over partial gamma? Yeah. Okay, and now we can go back as we train gamma equal to gamma minus the learning rate times the gradient. We can start adjusting it, right? Okay, let's go to the beta part. Partial L over partial beta will be what? Partial L over partial AI times partial AI over partial SB. Partial SB over partial beta. This we already know as delta.
Partial beta is 1.
Partial SB over partial beta is just 1. So what is partial L over partial beta?
Is that
Delta.
similar to minus?
Okay, So now let's come to the hard part. The hard part is computing
The derivative.
the delta V. Okay, so I'll do part of it because if I did everything, then I think you won't appreciate it as much. I'll give you the solution later, but at least let me take you to the point where you know what to do, but you'll fill in the details. Okay, so our goal is to determine Bn, which is defined right over here, right? Okay, so is from partial point of view, what is that equal to?
Delta L
Partial,
over delta, like everything.
isn't that partial L over partial SI? Because that's the definition of the delta. It's the derivative up to that point.
Yeah.
Everybody agrees?
Yes.
So now that we have identified, let's write this down. What will this be equal to? Put the complete chain now.
We can use delta.
Delta, just use delta, right?
Delta 1.
Okay, I'll put the delta, but just so that you can see the whole chain. So partial AI times partial AI over partial SB times partial SP over partial SI times partial SI hat over partial SI. Everybody agrees? What's this over here? Delta. Okay, let's go to partial
SB
over partial SI hat. Take a look at this
So, gamma.
equation. Gamma.
into SI.
Okay, so now partial L over partial will be delta gamma times partial SI hat over partial SI.
So derivative of that.
Okay, so now this is the hard part. So we need to still compute. Okay, so now if we go partial SI hat over partial SI. Okay, so now we are taking a look at this equation over here.
Derivative of that.
Okay, but see, this is where it becomes tricky. Okay, if you simply take a look at this one, you'll say, oh, it's easy. Wouldn't you say this is simply minus mu b over sigma square b plus epsilon?
No, right?
Oh, sorry, one.
Yeah.
Do you guys agree? Because I'm taking with respect to partial SI, so SI disappears. Mu b is, so you might say, oh, we have the answer, but that's the wrong
It's
answer.
the wrong answer.
Okay, why is it wrong answer? Because inside, there are multiple paths involved. When there are multiple paths involved, as you guys saw with the softmax, you have to accumulate the gradients on all of those paths. Okay, so now, so this is like I said, we use a red pen. In fact, I saw one of the articles on the internet doing this, so this is wrong. Okay, the correct way would be, let's focus on this part. Okay, if I expand this box over here, internally, because this box is basically computing this, right? Okay, so if you take a look over here, if SI came as the input, it will go into this whatever computation we are doing, okay, which is basically SI minus mu b over rho square b plus epsilon, correct? This is what's being done. So obviously it needs an SI, so the SI is fed over here. What else does this box need? It needs a mu b. Isn't SI part of that mu b? See, the definition, what does the batch mean? Isn't it 1 over n I equal to 0 to n SI? It's the average of all these outputs in that batch, right? Same way if you take a look at the equation for the variance. By definition, this is SI minus mu B. Square. So for us to be able to compute this thing, this is what we are calling SI hat, right? Don't we need the mu B as well as the mu square B? Okay, so pretend this feeds to a unit over here, the mu unit, which produces mu B. So this will feed in over here so that it can do SI minus mu B, right? Same way as you can see, the variance depends on SI as well. So think of it, SI is feeding to some variance unit. Okay, the minute you draw this picture, now how many gradient paths on the back propagation? If we are doing a back propagation, you'll see there will be one gradient through here, correct? One gradient through here. One gradient through here. So this has to be the sum of all the three gradients, okay? So now, okay, so partial SI hat over partial SI. This is this top part over here. Okay, then plus partial SI hat over partial mu B times partial mu B over partial SI. See if you agree with me. Isn't that from here to here, from here to here? Right? Last part. Partial SI hat over partial sigma square B times partial sigma square B over partial SI. Right? Everybody agrees? All I did was accumulated the three gradients, and that will be my partial SI hat effectively over SI. Okay, so now it's easy. Suppose I call this term 1, call this term 2, call this term 3. So one by one, if we start expanding it, putting the data there, and then once we are done, 1 plus 2 plus 3, then basically this part over here, as you can see, is 1 plus 2 plus 3. Okay, then we can simplify it further. Okay. Anyway, so let's go the first part. Okay, now partial SI hat over partial SI is easy from here to here. Partial SI hat over SI will be
1 upon
mu square B plus epsilon. Okay, let's go to the second part. This is 1. Partial SI hat over partial mu B times partial mu B over partial SI. Okay, let's go to this part over here. Partial mu B over partial SI. See if you're confused, just expand it. Wouldn't this be like S0 plus S1 plus S2, right? 1 over n. If I'm doing the partial with respect to, let's say, S2, what will it produce?
1 by n.
1 by n, exactly. So this is 1 over n. Okay, now let's go to partial SI hat over partial mu B. So partial SI hat over partial mu B.
Minus 1 by.
Okay, so this will be minus 1 over rho square B plus epsilon. Okay, but here's the tricky part. Does sigma B also has mu B in it?
Yes.
Yes, so that means further we have to take the derivative of multiplied by derivative of sigma square b plus epsilon with respect to mu b.
2 by n SI minus 1.
Okay, so what will that be?
Minus 2 by n.
Sigma square b is this one. Okay, so then this will become
Minus 2 by n.
rho square b plus epsilon. Okay, so if you see, take a look over here. Again, if you're confused, think of it this way as 0 minus mu b square plus s1 minus mu b square plus so on. Okay, so if we took the derivative with respect to mu b, will there be just one term or many terms?
One term.
One term.
One term.
Many terms.
Many
Oh,
terms,
well,
because
many,
it's
many,
appearing
yeah.
everywhere, right? So you can see this will be basically sigma I equal to 0 to n. 2 goes over there, and times SI minus VB, correct?
Times minus 1.
Minus 1. Minus 1. Okay, so that gives you this answer, right? Okay, very similarly, now let's take a look at the last part. So for the last part, it's this part. Okay, partial SI hat over partial sigma square partial SI hat over partial sigma square B, right? Okay, so this will be SI minus mu B. This is minus half, and sigma square B plus epsilon raised power negative 3 over 2. Am I right? Right? Because this is to the negative half. So negative half, negative 3 over 2 would be the derivative with respect to sigma square b. Okay, lastly, partial sigma square b over partial SI. So that was the last thing we needed in term 3. So partial sigma square b over partial SI. So this will be just one term, right? So this will be 2 over n. Okay. Is this right? 2 over n. This will be, if I expand it, this will be